always thought of this as a very interesting topic, and I've always questioned, where would this have begun? What time period do you think this began? So after quite some research, I found this. We're going to start towards the turn of the century, 1920s to be exact. So basically, what was going on was that the spectators, people who had already, previously been aware of films and were, I guess, regular goers to films and to theaters, were starting to get a little bored. They'd already, know the medium of visuals. They had seen many movies, and just quite frankly, they were getting rather bored of what they were seeing because it was mostly the same. It was just visuals, right? So basically, something which was incorporated during this time in an attempt to keep people interested in films and the medium was theatricality. Theatricality was a big thing in the sense that no longer would we be seeing, short films such as the Lumiere brothers, which we have seen. They're famous, they're good old factory workers, which were just natural people in natural settings. And basically, through this, we could see that the cameras, films were basically just revolving around the captivation of just everyday life, just basically showing life in itself. Now we start seeing basically film being used as a medium to express ideas or what have you. Theatricality, as I previously mentioned. So this becomes a big thing towards the 1920s. And more so, we start seeing, I guess, a very small sense of sound in films and a very small sense of what it could be, or could become, rather, in the future. In the sense that we see D.W. Griffith, our good friend, we've learned about him. And we've seen him come up with this, revolutionary method, per se, of basically synchronizing music, pre-recorded discs of audio, with his films. So this is a practical way of incorporating a little sound into films. However, this is not yet anything substantial. It's just him for the most part. Or in the same sense, it's not something that was completely, I guess, embraced by the industry just yet. Just wait. So this was a big thing. And obviously music and just, sound for the most part becomes something which the industry starts to really contemplate, in the sense, because it's what's basically pushing, obviously, the film's competitors, the film industry's competitor, radio. That's what's pushing it for the most part, just audio. The fact that something you can listen to, you still cannot listen to anything aside from just, little themes and on the spot, music. Which in all essence, I guess, it got rather tiresome, and it didn't have much to do with the film in itself, and it varied greatly depending on where you went, even if it was the same film, but I guess where it was projected, or who in itself was in charge of the audio. So not much uniformity when it comes to this. So here we're starting to see a great not a great change, but a thought incorporated into. What if we had sound in films? So that's the first thing. Shortly after, however, still in the 1920s, we see a man by the name of Dr. DeForest. So Dr. DeForest, what he does is basically he doesn't quite go the practical route as did D.W. Griffith, but rather he takes upon a more technological, or I guess, technological could be the word, more technological approach towards incorporating sound in film. He does this through an innovative product which he creates, which is by the name of the phonofilm. So according to the internet, this was basically an optical sound on file system. So from what I've read and what I've roughly understood, is what this did was it would project sound onto an already visual element. I'm not quite understanding as to how this works. Regardless, though, do not be confused. This is not yet the breakthrough in sound in films. Still just the notion of what if. So this was a little closer, however it was not yet the moment of sound. Alright, so to fight this threat which the radio presented to the big studios, they tried many drastic changes and things, which for the most part they were very they were innovative, and they really helped, I guess, film in itself, and they really changed the way it was projected. And many of these things, if not all of them, many of these changes still, endure till today, and we can see them throughout the films that we watch. So, among these, obviously, were Technicolor. So, the introduction of Technicolor into films, that was a very big breakthrough. Then we had bigger screens, obviously, larger projection. They attempted to make it into a more commercial thing, appeal to the masses and whatnot, what have you. And then obviously more expensive films came into production. So a lot more investment was seen going to films in an attempt and in the thought that possibly this would lure more spectators, more viewers. However, audio was still not a big factor. It was, I take that back actually. Not many companies contemplated the fact or really the possibility of audio. Only Warner Brothers, to which I applaud them because it was a fantastic move. But Warner Brothers got interested in audio on films. And, with their Vitaphone shorts, among which obviously I will be naming, but among these, they knew that voice had a role in music, obviously. However, they did not yet know the role that music could possibly have on these films as well. Music which was, I guess, not synchronized, but rather composed for the sole matter of really directing the audience's emotions through different scenes. So this would be seen in the future, however, but the screenplay writers, obviously at this point, screenplay writers and all the vocal actors, they start playing a much more important role than previously had been seen in the film industry. So this was a big breakthrough in the time for Warner Brothers. So, touching a little on the previously mentioned Vitaphone, which was a very, very important invention. So the Vitaphone basically consisted of a machine that made the synchronization between a film projector and a phonograph, which had already been invented. So this was pretty revolutionary. It really opened up, new routes which could be taken, which would eventually lead to music and films. So, under this technique, obviously, were created the first films. I guess you could say, why not, the talkies. So, the first talkies were seen under this new invention, such as Don Juan, but more importantly, and one of my, I think, pretty cool personal favorites maybe, The Jazz Singer. So this, I'm not too sure who exactly does who exactly plays the jazz singer in this, but I have seen the recreations, which I find very cool, of I believe it's the jazz singer, and it's I think it's Al Johnson or whatnot. Anywho, it's a recreation of a cartoon. It may even be Warner Bros. I don't know, but anyway, it's a recreation of an owl playing the same role as a jazz singer and the same concept. I find very interesting anyway. But however, this serves to show that the jazz singer played a huge and still plays a pretty big role when it comes to popular culture and I guess the appreciation of the first talkies. So this was a big breakthrough at the time, and one step closer to music and films. So, potential problems with the Vitaphone. Something which we saw was now that there was a potential way of incorporating sound into films, and now that we saw voice, actors being able to speak as opposed to just directly having to read subtitles on the screen, now that this was possible, many of those people who were actually, who had jobs in the industry by performing or creating music for films right on the spot started to notice that there may be a possibility for structural unemployment, in the sense that now they may become quickly obsolete in the future due to the fact that they might not even be needed, because now there was a possibility of just having the audio directly integrated with the film and in a much more synchronized manner and a little more meaningful in my honest opinion. However, these were just speculations for the moment, in the sense that not until the 1930s would we be actually seeing new inventions which would be able to make this possible, the direct synchronization of complete audio to the film. So not until then would we be able to hear not just music but also vocals which were directly integrated. Not till then. So this starts to get a little exciting. Touching a little bit on what I just mentioned, right? How people started to fear, certain people started to fear the fact that now maybe there could be an integration of music directly on the film. Well, this actually came to happen in the 1930s. And what happened in this sense was the creation of, yep, you guessed it, the soundtrack. The soundtrack, something which we still see today and plays a huge role. The soundtrack was invented around this time. Now, what this basically led to and allowed new companies to do now was basically they could start elaborating their own music. They could start composing their own music, both music, sound effects, vocals, what have you, and they could then pre-record it and then project it alongside, or not even alongside, but directly incorporated it into the film. So this was a huge breakthrough. Right after the creation of film soundtracks came another tool for film music as well. and that was the option to record this very music, not in a studio, but rather in recording studios. So right now, at this point in time, we see the great possibility come up for these film companies to basically integrate another process of the whole production of films into into their own hands, in the sense that they could now create the music which was going to be shown for their films. So we could cut someone out right there, more profit. I mean more profit going to them, but more importantly, more investment was directly going into the production of films as opposed to going through middlemen. That's just something, a way I analyzed it, but I thought that was that was rather interesting because it allowed for more interesting movies per se, right? So this was something big. Obviously, a big contender right now was Warner Brothers. So Warner Brothers was pretty good, and then obviously it came in MGM and Universal Studios. They started having their own departments when it came to this. It was, I guess, the department for the creation of scores and film music. So this became a big factor around this time, luckily. So now having soundtracks being developed, we jump ahead to the 1940s. So after research and achievement of the technology of Bell's Industries, a company by the name of Bell's Industries, the film Fantasia, directed by Walt Disney and conducted by Leopold Stokowski, was released. So this film was the first film to ever use the stereophonic system, which was to receive the name of Fantasound. This was very interesting and very important actually, and it actually transcends even outside of film, in the sense that it starts to really actually intertwine with the whole development of sound technology in the sense. So this is very interesting. So Fantasound, what it was a whole system, a system which used multiple channels to record the Philadelphia Orchestra, which was basically the orchestra which elaborated all of the different compositions which can be seen throughout the movie. I've actually got Fantasia 2000 here. I've watched it a couple times. It's very interesting, very cool. And what it is basically, if you've never watched it, but the whole gist of Fantasia in itself is it's different caricatures, different hand-drawn cartoons of different characters. There's no real storyline, I guess, but basically what it is, it's these cartoons are directly synchronized. They're linked to very famous compositions. One which I actually remember, one of the few I remember from Fantasia 2000, which is this one, is during one of the cartoons. Basically, it's a construction worker in New York, and it's just his routinary life displayed throughout little comics. But something interesting about this is it's directly synchronized to George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. I definitely recommend watching it if you haven't, and I'll play a little segment of that, shortly. But that's something interesting about this, just to let you know, and if you haven't ever watched it, just to let you understand what Fantasia is about. But anywho, back to this. So, and I quote about the whole technological side of Fantasound. It's rather complex to my understanding, but I quote, Fantasound, the way it worked was basically using multiple optical recorders allowed sections of the orchestra to be handled separately during mixdown, right? So, Fantasound consisted of two projectors, one that projected the film and that used the mono track for the audio, in the case of failure or of the main audio dispositive. This is even used today, which is pretty insane. But anyway, this is how it worked. So it used one track for that, and then it used a second track, which was actually synchronized with a film projector and reproduced for monotracks. One in the back of the theater, one in the right of the theater, one in the side, and one in the center. Now what does this remind you of? Just think. In my honest opinion, and not my honest opinion, but I read up, but this is actually the beginning of what is known to be now as the freaking surround sound system, so that's pretty cool. And right now we're actually starting to see at this time period innovation come through and just the technology necessary for the future development of surround sound as we know it today. A huge breakthrough. So this is very cool. So, looking ahead a little, right after the introduction of the Fantasound and everything related to it, and the little introduction of what was to be in the future, the surround sound system, came the 1950s. So along with the 1950s, however, came a huge crisis due to the introduction of the TV sets, and not just that, but the post-war crisis, and just the change of the economic change and just change in interests. Obviously, we're looking at a different time, different era right now. So with the introduction of the previously mentioned TV sets to the households, people started resisting to go into theaters. Obviously, there's a little change in taste right here, and everything regarding, I guess, convenience just obviously screams TV sets. You can just watch TV from home. Why have to go to the theater? This was the mentality at the time. So this was going on, and additionally, the decade brought the Cinerama, which it was a breakthrough, a little breakthrough for the film industry. So what this consisted of was these were the first movies that were in real widescreen format. So in order for this to be done, however, there had to be an improvement to the audio as well. Now we're actually seeing audio playing a significant role in movies. So right away, after a study from the engineers Hazard Reeves and Wentworth Fling, there was a discovery, or I guess a breakthrough, that at least a 5-track head was needed for the improvement of the soundtrack for this desired format of widescreen. So it needed to there was the big need to switch for this to this new special 7-track head stack, which is created to employ the soundtrack. So we see the introduction of the 7-track head stack during this time, a big breakthrough in sound. So guys, I feel like we've learned a little bit about music and films, and I think we can now appreciate it a little more, or at least understand, or really notice the effect, or at least open our eyes per se to the possible effects of music when we're watching a film. I hope this will allow you to really think about what you're listening to, and maybe in some way attempt to notice how it affects you, not just on a unconscious level, but rather really understand it or think about it when you're watching a film. And obviously there's the question. Obviously there's a reason to question if nowadays, talking 2015, everything is relatively the same when it comes to music and films. Are these, are there still great composers in existence? Is it really seen as the same way it used to be? Is there really such an elaborate process to the creation of music and films? Well, to answer that, yes to some extent. There still are many great composers which really just their job consists of creating these amazing pieces for highly funded films. Obviously, it's not an entirely accessible thing nowadays. Not every film has a directly elaborate composition of underscoring and soundtrack, but some do in a sense. Some of the great composers which we see now, which I've actually just mentioned throughout this little video, but haven't really elaborated on, are John Williams. John Williams makes part of the example I gave with Luke Skywalker in Star Wars. He created the soundtrack for that, the scoring. Then obviously we have Alexander Desplat. He's got 2 Oscar nominations. We've got Hans Zimmer, and Hans Zimmer is just a huge figure when it comes to music composition nowadays. He's done everything ranging from The Gladiator, which is one of my personal favorites, all the way to Black Hawk Down. An amazing, film score as well when it comes to that. And more recently, I believe also he was involved with Interstellar, which is a great movie, I believe, as well. So yes, music still does play a huge role, and in some way, it's very nice to really notice that it's very traditional in the same sense as it used to be back in the day, back when it first started. We have very elaborate editing methods nowadays which make it very efficient, the whole editing process. However, for these great movies, the whole composition part of, the soundtracks is still the same. It's still, live orchestras, whether it be the London Symphony Orchestra or whatever, or the Philadelphia Orchestra or whatever. It's real live, orchestras which are composing these themes, which are then edited, into the film. But it's amazing, in my honest opinion, how these composers pair with these orchestras to create these fine-tuned compositions which just match perfectly with scenes you're watching, and just, they make you feel a certain way. They really do. They affect your emotion entirely when you're watching a movie, whether it be Black Hawk Down, Interstellar, Star Wars, Gattaca, whatever. It's insane, the effect of music in films. So now, without further ado, and with great pleasure, I'd like to roll out a little segment of my favorite films, or at least my favorite compositions in films. So let's see what we got.